Hey, what's good everybody? Welcome to the second video of my instrumentation coverage on my Bitwig 3.1 review. Today we're going to be looking at FM-4, which is an FM synthesis. Frequency modulation, or FM, basically means that you take the frequency of one signal and you either modify that into itself or into another operator, oscillator, signal XYZ. It can be kind of confusing, so just try to bear with me because the organization of explaining all of this is a little bit sporadic, so forgive me if it seems like I'm jumping around a bit. There's just no way around it. Most importantly, let's go ahead and look at how to get sound out of this. The gain knob is dictated over here, which basically means the volume of each operator, and that's labeled between 1 and the noise generator, which matches up between the operators here. Now over here we have a couple of values, the first one being the ratio of the sound to itself, and then also the hertz value. Now this basically just means that we can increase this more exponentially, whereas this is more of a fine tune to change the overall pitch. What that basically means is I'm going to pull up the window here to kind of exemplify. This is just a sine wave on operator 1, and if I change this, you can see that the rate of this has exponentially increased. Now, if you didn't know, the faster that a signal vibrates, the higher pitched it becomes, and that's because of the speed itself. And so by changing all of these frequencies or hertz values XYZ, you can basically change the pitch in a different way. It's more of a scientific way of looking at frequency and harmonics, but once you kind of wrap that around your head, then this becomes a little bit easier to understand. So within all of these, we also have our noise operator, and this is pretty standard. If I turn this up and turn this down, we have our frequency of the noise. We also have our resonance, which is making that sound kind of windy like that. Then we also have our overdrive. And then finally we have our modulation knobs, which we'll talk about in just a second. On the bottom we have our ADSR, which is pretty typical. One thing that you can do that's pretty cool is you can hit this tab and set your ADSR to automate any of these numbers or values that appear in green. It's kind of unfortunate that you can't do that within the grid, but it's not terrible. We have our normal pitch that you can set the global tuning to. The glide serves as portamento of how long it takes from one note to go to the other. So if I hit a sine wave in C, and then I hit an F, the higher that this value is, the longer it's going to take for it to get to the desired pitch that we have. The gain is synonymous with volume. We have our panning, and then we have our overall output, but those things are all kind of pretty easy to kind of figure out on its own. Let's go ahead and talk about the fun stuff, which is the grid that's right here in the middle of the section. If you're confused, just as like this is going to be the most straightforward that I can possibly make it, think of it as going across first and then down. And what that basically means is we have our operators 1 through noise, and they can affect either operator 1, 2, 3, or 4. If I want operator 1 to affect itself, then I'm going to kind of match this up like an Excel sheet or something and have this affect itself. So let's actually listen to this. I can also set a different value on operator 2, because this is at a ratio of 2, and have that affect operator 1. And you can start to see that by changing the number values between all of these, you get some really interesting results. And long story short, the key to this is to honestly turn up these values and play with the ratios until you get some kind of cool sound. And that's really all it is to FM. This matrix is kind of like daunting at first because you're like, I don't get how this works. But again, if you think about going from across to downwards, then you should be pretty okay. So the modulation knobs on all of these, again, remember I was talking about jumping around, just basically serves as a mixed function in relationship to this. And so it doesn't seem like that's very important, but take a look at this. What it becomes is, let's say we have this sound, and I back off of the modulation. It's almost like it becomes a wavetable. And by combining all of these elements together, and let's say you have some crazy automation or something on all of these, you can get some very complex sounds that could be kind of cool. So let's do just that. Let's take an LFO, and I think that we'll make a bass today because FM is very common with bass, and then also like if you're from back in the day of like Sega Genesis using FM drives and stuff, it's really cool. We're going to take one of these and we're going to automate that here. We're going to automate this one. We'll automate this one, and we'll automate this one, just as a means of moving all of this. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is arbitrarily only leave operator 1 on, but I'm going to have each of these affecting this sound. So we'll pull this one up, we'll pull this one up, and pull this one up to different values. And again, it doesn't really matter. What I am going to change is the ratios of all of these. So I'll set this one to 4, and then I'll set this one to 5 or 6. Doesn't matter. And it's a really easy way to get some interesting movement between all of these. Let's go ahead and back off of that, and I'm going to set this back at 0. And I'm going to show you something a little bit different. Now, one cool thing that you can do with the Hertz is that if you have two operators, at least two operators going on, then, or you have FM happening to itself, or there's a lot of different ways to solve it. But if you offset the Hertz value of this just a little bit, then see how this affects the sound. Let's give this some harmonics so we can tell the difference. Now, the more that we offset the Hertz, the faster that this is going to oscillate at. Now, again, it's very similar to detuning, but the difference is that when you offset the Hertz, no matter what pitch you play, the detuning speed or the phase oscillation doesn't change. So if I want this to go faster, then I have to mess with this. And again, if I want it to go slower, then I'll kind of set that value up here as far as detuning. You can either do this mathematically, or you can literally just do something like that and see what happens. I have no idea what that's going to sound like, but we can find out. And sometimes it's cool to just see if you can create some interesting harmonics in that way. With all that being said, the key to this again is just kind of turning on all of these operators, or maybe not turning on all the operators, but just kind of playing with the number values here in order to get some cool tonalities. And once you kind of find something that you're happy with, then you can either change it, you can change the values and then kind of change the relationship between how each sound is affecting each other, or you can start to add in that modulation that we were talking about with the LFO tab. And it becomes really exciting and really fun because, for one, it is a more mathematical approach, but because if you're anything like me, I don't understand the mathematics behind it 100%, then really there's a lot of room for play between this. But check out some of the presets that are on here and try to reverse engineer of how some of these things work. But like I said, once you understand how everything is affecting each other in such a way, then you can see that the routing options in this are actually pretty robust. And so I encourage you guys to really just explore. Don't worry about trying to make something specific with this sound. Just understand that you can make sound affect itself and find something that's cool. The last thing that I didn't cover is kind of self-explanatory because it's already in here, but we have our note effects to where you can throw an arpeggiator in, or we also have our nested effects that you can put anything inside the device. But again, that's stuff that you guys should already be aware of. But that's it for FM-4. Hopefully you guys have some fun with that, make some cool basses, pads, and all that, and have a great time with it. We'll talk about Phase 4 in the next video.